A millionaire hiding to test his girlfriend with his young son. But the housekeeper found out everything. Subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The smell of freshly baked croissants mingled with the aroma of brewed coffee, creating a familiar atmosphere that contrasted with the tense silence hanging over the penthouse. Robert Miller adjusted his glasses and gazed at the ocean in Miami through the panoramic glass, its waves gently breaking on the golden sands of South Beach. At 43, the businessman carried the weight of a pain that seemed never to diminish even after 2 years, since the tragedy that changed his life forever. "Dad, Sarah said the coffee is ready," announced Michael, his 7-year-old son, appearing at the door of the living room with his school uniform still wrinkled and his brown hair tousled from sleep. The boy had the same green eyes as his father, but his expression still held the innocence of one who did not fully understand why his mother never returned home. "I'm coming, buddy. Did you brush your teeth?" Robert forced a smile, trying to hide the anxiety that had consumed him since he woke up at 5 in the morning, unable to go back to sleep. "I did. Sarah even checked," replied Michael proudly, before running back to the kitchen. Robert sighed deeply. Sarah had become much more than a housekeeper for his family. The 46-year-old from Pennsylvania, with her maternal demeanor and natural wisdom, was the safe harbor that kept the house running since he returned to work after months of mourning. Short, with grey hair always neatly tied in a bun, she had brown eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. "Good morning, Mr. Robert," greeted Sarah when he finally entered the open kitchen. She was preparing Michael's lunchbox with the same dedication she gave to her own daughter, who was studying nursing in Miami. "Did you sleep well? I saw that your office light was on late." "Some business issues, nothing serious," Robert lied, pouring himself coffee into a white porcelain cup. The truth was that he had spent hours mentally crafting a plan that terrified him as much as it calmed him. A plan that would test the limits of everything he believed about love, loyalty, and second chances. Sarah watched him with that penetrating gaze that seemed to read his soul. With a degree in psychology from the University of Pennsylvania, she had set aside her profession when her husband passed away, moving south in search of better opportunities. She worked as a housekeeper, not out of lack of ability, but out of necessity. She needed to support her daughter's studies and care for her elderly mother who remained in the Northeast. "Mr. Robert, you know you can trust me, right?" "Anything you need," she said, drying her hands on the embroidered apron she wore over her navy blue uniform. "I know, Sarah, and I'm very grateful for that," Robert replied, feeling a lump in his throat. If she knew what he was about to do, would she still trust him? The apartment's doorbell interrupted the moment. Michael ran to open it, shouting excitedly, "It's Jessica! It's Jessica!" Robert felt his stomach tighten. Jessica Smith, 29, a digital influencer with over 800,000 followers on Instagram, entered the apartment like a burst of energy. Tall, platinum blonde, always impeccably made up, she wore a designer tracksuit that cost more than many people's monthly salaries. Her blue eyes sparkled with an intensity that Robert had previously interpreted as passion, but which he was now beginning to question. "Hi, love," she exclaimed, kissing Robert on the lips without even looking at Michael, who was eagerly waiting for attention that would not come. "Sorry to come so early, but I have a shoot in South Beach at 9 and wanted to see you before." "Hi, Jessica," said Michael shyly, tugging at the hem of her shirt. "Hi, Mikey," she replied distractedly, checking her phone notifications. "Robert, did you see that Mariana posted pictures from her trip to Dubai? The hotel is a dream." Sarah observed everything in silence, pretending to be busy organizing the refrigerator. But Robert noticed that she was registering every gesture, every word. The housekeeper had a unique ability to read people, a result of both her academic training and life experience. "Michael, go brush your hair," "It's time for school," Sarah gently instructed. "Can I have coffee with you guys first?" the boy asked. "Of course you can, my love," Robert said, pulling a chair for his son. Jessica sighed loudly, clearly impatient. "Honey, I can't stay long. I have that commitment, and then I need to stop by the salon to get my nails done." During breakfast, Robert closely observed Jessica's every reaction. When Michael spilled some chocolate milk on the table, she made a face of disgust. When the boy tried to tell her about a drawing he made at school, she pretended to listen while fiddling with her phone. Small signs that Robert had been noticing for weeks, but today they took on a different dimension. "Jessica," Robert said, testing the waters, "would you like to go with me to pick up Michael from school today? We can grab some acai afterward." "Oh, honey, I can't today. I have that photo shoot for the supplement brand, remember? And then Camilla scheduled dinner at the Lobster Shack," she replied without looking up from her phone. Michael lowered his head, disappointed. Sarah discreetly stroked the boy's hair, a gesture that did not go unnoticed by Robert. At 7:15, Michael left for school on the school bus. Jessica quickly said goodbye, claiming she was late, and Robert was left alone in the penthouse with Sarah. The silence that settled was heavy, laden with unspoken words. "Mr. Robert," Sarah finally said, "are you sure everything is okay?" Robert stared at her for a long time. In that moment, Sarah had known Michael since he was 3 years old. She had been the one to comfort him on the nights when the boy cried for his mother. She had been the one to help him with his first homework assignments when he returned to school after the accident. If anyone deserved his trust, it was her. "Sarah, can I ask you a question? As a psychologist, what do you think of Jessica's relationship with Michael?" The question caught Sarah off guard, but her answer came without hesitation. "Do you really want to know my professional opinion?" "I do. That girl doesn't show genuine interest in the child. Michael constantly seeks her approval and always ends up frustrated. For a child who has already suffered a significant loss, that can be very harmful," Sarah said, measuring each word. Robert closed his eyes. The housekeeper's words confirmed his worst fears. At that moment, he made a decision that would change the course of their lives. He would test Jessica's true character, and for that, he would need to pretend that his successful life was crumbling. The plan that was germinating in his mind was risky but necessary, because Michael deserved more than a selfish stepmother. He deserved true love. The following Monday, Robert arrived early at the office of Miller & Associates, located in the heart of Miami's business district. The mirrored glass building reflected the morning sun as he walked through the hallways he knew by heart, greeting employees he had worked with for over a decade. His company, which had started as a small family business, was now responsible for some of the most luxurious real estate developments in Greater Miami. "Mark, can you come to my office?" Robert asked the chief accountant, a 38-year-old man with graying temples and discreet glasses. Mark Johnson was more than an employee. He was a childhood friend who knew all the secrets of the company and Robert's personal life. "Sure, Robert. Is something wrong?" Mark asked, noticing his friend's serious expression. Once in the presidential office, with its walls lined with fine wood and a privileged view of the Miami Beach Bridge, Robert closed the door and turned on the air conditioning. The environment, always organized and professional, contained photographs of completed projects, framed diplomas, and on a side table, pictures of Michael at various moments in his childhood. "Mark, I need your help with something unusual." Robert began, loosening his navy blue tie. "I need you to help me create documents that make it look like the company is in serious financial trouble." Mark nearly spilled the coffee he was drinking. "What do you mean, Robert? What kind of trouble?" "It's not true, obviously, but I need to test someone very important in my life, someone who could become Michael's stepmother," Robert explained. sitting back in the leather chair behind the executive desk. The accountant was silent for a few seconds, processing the information. He had known Robert since adolescence and knew he was not a man to make hasty or frivolous decisions. "Are we talking about Jessica?" Mark asked, lowering his voice. "Exactly, and I know you never liked her much." "Robert, as your friend and accountant, I have to tell you, that woman has never shown real interest in Michael, and she knows how much our company makes each month." Robert sighed deeply. "That's exactly why I need to do this test. Michael has already lost his mother. I can't allow him to get attached to someone who is only here for financial gain." Mark leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "What kind of documents do you want me to prepare? Financial reports showing losses, fictitious labor lawsuits, work stoppages. Nothing that could really harm the company, but convincing enough for someone who doesn't understand the industry," Robert detailed. "This is risky, Robert. What if she finds out? What if it leaks to the competition? That's why I'm only counting on you. And we'll be careful about who has access to the information." Mark thought for a few minutes, drumming his fingers on the table. "Are you sure about this? Because once we start, there's no turning back. And what if she really likes you?" "Mark, in the last 2 months I've watched how she treats Michael. He tries to get close to her constantly, and she always finds an excuse. Last week, he drew a family and included her in the drawing. When he showed it to her, she just said, 'How cute,' and changed the subject," Robert said, his voice heavy with sadness. "I understand. And what about Sarah? Are you going to tell her?" "No, Sarah is too principled. She wouldn't be able to pretend, but I suspect she has already noticed that something is not right." That afternoon, the two men worked discreetly on creating the fake documents. Mark, with his accounting experience, knew exactly how to make the numbers convincing without leaving traces that could compromise the real company. They created reports showing a 40% drop in revenue, fictitious lawsuits, and even a fake collection letter from a bank. Meanwhile, at home, Sarah noticed subtle changes in Robert's behavior. He was coming home later, seemed worried, and for the first time since she started working there, he had left some papers scattered around the home office, something completely out of his organizational pattern. "Hey, Sarah," Michael said, using the affectionate nickname he had created for the housekeeper, "is Dad sad because of work?" Sarah, who was helping the boy with his homework at the kitchen table, stopped writing. The child's question confirmed her suspicions that something was going on. "Why do you think that, my love? He keeps looking at some papers and making a grumpy face. And yesterday I heard him talking on the phone about money," Michael replied, biting his pencil as he tried to solve a math problem. "Your dad is a very smart and hard-working man. If there's a problem, he'll figure it out," Sarah reassured him, but mentally noted that she needed to pay more attention. That night, when Robert got home around 10 o'clock, Sarah was still awake, folding clothes in the living room, in the service area. It was unusual for her to stay up so late, but something was bothering her. "Sarah, are you still awake?" Robert asked, loosening his tie. "I was finishing up some things. Michael asked if you were having trouble at work," she said, watching his reaction closely. Robert felt his heart race. If even Michael was noticing his concern, Jessica would certainly pick up on it when he started to implement the plan. "It's just that we really have some challenges ahead," he replied, opting for a half-truth. "The real estate market isn't easy this year." Sarah nodded, but her eyes showed that she wasn't completely convinced. "If you need anything, I'll be here. You know that, right?" "I know, Sarah, and I really appreciate it." The next morning, Robert began to execute the first phase of the plan. During breakfast, he casually commented, "It looks like we'll have to postpone that trip to Cancun we were planning, Jessica. Some projects are having issues, and I need to focus on resolving them." Jessica, who was posting a picture of her gourmet breakfast on social media, stopped typing. "What do you mean, Postpone. I already told the girls we were going. They're just temporary issues, love. It'll be resolved soon, Robert said, watching her reaction closely. But Robert, you know I was counting on this trip. I even planned to create content. I've already talked to some brands about potential partnerships, Jessica insisted, clearly irritated. Michael, who was quietly sipping his chocolate milk, looked back and forth between them, not fully understanding the tension in the air. I understand, Jessica, but sometimes life throws unexpected situations our way, Robert said, his calm voice contrasting with her agitation. Sarah, who was organizing the kitchen, paid attention to every word. Her experience as a psychologist had taught her to identify behavioral patterns, and something in Jessica's reaction deeply unsettled her. The plan was officially in motion, and Robert hoped that his worst fears about Jessica wouldn't come true, even knowing deep down that they probably would. The month of May brought with it the characteristic chill of autumn in Miami, along with the first reactions to the carefully orchestrated plan by Robert. In the penthouse, the central heating was working at full blast, while outside, the first drizzles of the season fogged the panoramic windows. It was a Tuesday, when Robert decided to intensify the act. Mark called me earlier, Robert said to Jessica, who was on the beige leather sofa, choosing outfits for her upcoming posts. It seems the public prosecutor's office has halted 2 of our projects. Environmental issues. Jessica looked up from her tablet for the first time in 20 minutes. Is that serious? It could be. It means we'll have to stop construction until we resolve all the bureaucracy, and that costs money. A lot of money, Robert replied, feigning a concern that, ironically, was beginning to feel real as he saw her cold reaction to the news. "Oh," was all she said, returning her attention to the screen. "Do you think it will take long to resolve?" The question came with a tone that Robert recognized immediately. It was the same one she used when she wanted to know if something would interfere with her personal plans. "I don't know, love. It could take months," Robert lied, watching how she bit. Her lower lip, a nervous tick that appeared when she was upset. At that moment, Michael entered the room, carrying a drawing he made at school. The boy had just arrived and was still wearing the blue and white uniform of Lincoln Academy, one of the most traditional institutions in Miami. "Dad, look what I made in art class today," Michael exclaimed, proudly extending a sheet of paper where he had drawn a house with 3 figures, a tall man, a child, and a woman with black hair tied in a bun. "That's beautiful, son. Who are these people?" Robert asked, already knowing the answer. "It's me, you, and Grandma Sarah. The teacher asked us to draw our family," Michael replied with a wide smile. Robert felt a tightness in his chest. Jessica, who had been dating him for 6 months, was not in the drawing, but Sarah was. "Michael, where's Jessica in your drawing?" Robert asked, curious to see his son's reaction. The boy was silent for a few seconds, looking at Jessica, who continued fiddling with her tablet as if the conversation didn't interest her. "Oh, I forgot," Michael murmured, clearly unconvinced. "No problem, my love. Beautiful drawing." Robert said, hugging his son. Jessica hadn't even looked at the paper. Sarah, who was watching everything from the open kitchen while preparing an afternoon snack, felt a pang in her heart. She knew Michael well enough to know he hadn't forgotten anyone. The child had drawn who he truly considered family. "Michael, come here. Grandma Sarah made carrot cake," she called, trying to break the tension that had settled in the room. The boy ran to the kitchen, leaving Robert and Jessica alone in the living room. It was then that Robert noticed something that deeply disturbed him. Jessica continued, scrolling through social media as if nothing had happened. Neither the drawing nor the news about the financial issues seemed to have any emotional impact on her. "Jessica," Robert said, testing once more, "don't you find it strange that Michael didn't include you in the family drawing? "Oh, Robert, kids do those things. It doesn't mean anything," she replied without looking up, liking a photo of an international influencer in Paris. The response cut Robert like a blade. Anyone who truly cared about a child would be, at the very least, intrigued by the situation. But Jessica showed an indifference that bordered on cruel. That night, after Jessica left claiming she had a work dinner, she always seemed to have work dinners when the atmosphere got tense. Robert found Sarah on the back porch, sipping chamomile tea and gazing at the city lights. "May I keep you company?" he asked, bringing a cup of coffee. "Of course, Mr. Robert, it's always a pleasure," Sarah replied, making space at the small reclaimed wood table. They sat in silence for a few minutes, listening to the distant sound of traffic and the wind rustling the trees in the condo. Robert knew that Sarah was an observant and intelligent woman, and part of him wished he could confess the entire plan to her. "Sarah," he finally said, "do you think Michael is okay? Emotionally, I mean." The question caught Sarah off guard. It was exactly what she had been reflecting on for weeks. "Can I speak honestly, Mr. Robert?" "Always. Michael is a resilient child, but he is still processing the loss of his mother. He needs stability and affection, and most importantly, he needs to feel that the people around him are there out of genuine love, not obligation," Sarah said, choosing each word carefully. "And do you think he feels that from everyone in his life?" Sarah hesitated. She knew she was treading on delicate ground, but her loyalty was, above all, to Michael's well-being. "Mr. Robert, do you really want to know what I think?" "I do. That girl, she doesn't see Michael as a person. She sees him as an obstacle, an inconvenient detail in your life. And Michael senses that. Children always do," Sarah said, her voice low but firm. Robert closed his eyes. Hearing his suspicions confirmed by someone so close to Michael was both painful and comforting. "Do you think I should break up with her?" "Mr. Robert, that decision is yours alone to make. But I can say one thing. Michael deserves someone who truly loves him, not someone who merely tolerates his existence." In that moment, Robert made a decision. He would intensify the plan. He needed to be absolutely certain about Jessica's character before making any definitive choices. Michael had already lost a mother. He couldn't also lose the chance to have a maternal figure who truly loved him. When he returned inside, he found Michael still awake, reading an adventure book in bed. "Still awake, champ?" "Dad," Michael said, closing the book, "Jessica doesn't like me, does she?" The question hit Robert like a punch to the gut. "Why do you think that, son?" "She never wants to play with me, and she's always on her phone when I try to talk to her." "Mommy never did that," Michael said, his eyes welling up. Robert sat on the edge of the bed and hugged his son. "Michael, you are the most important person in my life, and anyone who is part of our family has to love you as much as I do. Understand?" Michael nodded, snuggling into his father's arms. That night, Robert could barely sleep. The plan would continue, but now he had one certainty. If Jessica failed the test, she wouldn't just be a discarded girlfriend. She would be someone he would prevent from hurting his son more than she already had. June arrived with its chilly mornings and weak sunny afternoons, typical of a Miami winter. In the penthouse, Robert was implementing the second phase of his plan with surgical precision. It was a Friday when he decided to take the next step. Cancel the romantic weekend he had. Promise Jessica in the mountains. "Honey, I need to tell you something," Robert said during breakfast as Michael finished getting ready for school. "I'm going to have to cancel our trip to the mountains." Jessica, who was applying lip gloss, using the front camera of her phone as a mirror, stopped abruptly. "What do you mean, cancel?" "Robert, I've already posted stories about the trip. I even picked out my outfits." "A serious problem has come up with one of our major investors. It seems he wants to withdraw funding from two important projects, Robert lied, watching every micro-expression on her face. But can't you resolve this on Monday? It's just a weekend, Jessica insisted, her voice rising an octave. Michael appeared in the kitchen at that moment, carrying his backpack decorated with Spider-Man characters. The boy immediately sensed the tension in the air, and his green eyes filled with apprehension, a reaction Robert recognized as a remnant of the trauma from losing his mother. "Is everything okay?" Michael asked timidly. "Everything is great, my son," Robert said, running his hand through the boy's brown hair. "Just adult conversations." "Everything is not great," Jessica exploded. "Your dad is cancelling our trip. Because of work. Again." Michael visibly shrank at her aggressive tone. Sarah, who was washing the dishes, immediately approached and placed her hand on the child's shoulder in a protective gesture. "Michael, how about having some hot chocolate before school?" Sarah suggested softly, trying to distract the boy from the argument. "Jessica," Robert said, his voice calm but with a warning tone, "could you lower your voice? You're scaring Michael." "Scaring? Robert, I'm just expressing my frustration. Can't I even do that anymore?" she retorted, crossing her arms over her chest. What Robert saw next shocked him. Jessica looked directly at Michael with a pure expression of irritation, as if the child's presence was an inconvenience. There was no affection, no maternal patience, just annoyance at having to modulate her behavior because of a child. "Michael, come here, my love," Sarah said, noticing the awkwardness of the situation. "Let's see if your lunchbox is ready." As Michael walked away with Sarah, Robert stepped closer to Jessica. "You need to understand that Michael is my priority. He always will be." "I understand that, Robert, but I also need to feel like a priority sometimes. For the past 2 months, everything revolves around the company's problems or his needs," Jessica said, pointing in the direction where Michael had gone. The way she referred to her own son, he, as if Michael were a stranger, made Robert's blood boil. But he maintained his composure, knowing he needed to let her reveal her true character. "Jessica, Michael lost his mother 2 years ago. Robert was still recovering emotionally. He needed stability and affection. And I am giving affection. But I also have a career. I have commitments. I can't live for a child who isn't even mine." The words escaped before she could contain herself. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert felt as if he had been slapped in the face. Sarah, who was coming back from the snack area, heard the last words and froze, her expression reflecting the shock everyone felt. "I'm sorry," Jessica murmured, realizing she had gone too far. "I didn't mean that, it's just that I'm stressed with work and—" "Michael!" Robert shouted, ignoring her apologies. "Come say goodbye to Daddy." The boy ran in, clearly relieved to escape the tension. Robert hugged him tightly, whispering in his ear, "I love you more than anything in this world, okay?" "I love you too, Dad," Michael replied, returning the embrace. After the school transport took Michael away, Robert turned to Jessica. "I think it's better if we talk when I get back from work. Now is not a good time." "Robert, please don't be like this." "I spoke without thinking," Jessica tried, realizing she had made a serious mistake. "Jessica, I'm going to work. We'll talk later," Robert said, grabbing his car keys. When Robert left, Jessica was left alone with Sarah in the apartment. The embarrassment in the air was palpable. Sarah continued her household tasks in silence, but Jessica could feel the judgment in the housekeeper's posture. "Sarah," Jessica finally said, "you can't tell Robert about what you heard, okay?" Sarah stopped cleaning the table and looked directly at her. "Miss Jessica, I have worked for Mr. Robert for 4 years. My loyalty is to him and to Michael." "But you understand that I was nervous, right? I didn't mean what I said about Michael." "Ma'am," Sarah said, using a tone she reserved for people who needed to hear hard truths. When a person is nervous, that's when they speak their true thoughts, and what you said was very serious. Jessica felt her cheeks heat up. You don't have the right to judge me. You're just a housekeeper. The insult echoed in the kitchen like a slap. Sarah, who had a master's degree in psychology and had given up her career to support her family, felt the humiliation burn in her chest. But she maintained her dignity. You're right, I am a housekeeper, but I am also someone who loves that child as if he were my grandson, and I will protect him from anyone who wants to harm him, Sarah said, her voice low but filled with determination. Jessica stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door, leaving Sarah alone with her troubled thoughts. The housekeeper knew she had witnessed something important, something Robert needed to know, but she also knew it wasn't her place to interfere directly in his relationship. She decided to be even more vigilant from then on. Michael was her priority, and she wouldn't allow anyone to hurt that child, not while she was around to protect him. When Robert returned that evening, he found Sarah preparing dinner with a thoughtful expression. Jessica hadn't come back, and he suspected she was avoiding a difficult conversation. "How was your day, Sarah?" "Calm, Mr. Robert," she replied, but he sensed there was something unsaid in her voice. The plan was working. Jessica was revealing her true nature, and Robert was beginning to understand that his worst suspicions about her were being confirmed. The last Saturday of June brought the traditional summer block party at Ocean View Estates, an event Michael had been eagerly anticipating since May. The party was held in the ground floor community room, decorated with colorful streamers, crepe paper balloons, and artificial bonfires that created a cozy and festive atmosphere. The smell of sweet popcorn, hot cider, and corn pudding filled the social floor, mingling with the lively sound of country music echoing through the hallways. Robert had invited Jessica 3 weeks in advance, knowing how much she liked to plan her outfits for social events. Michael, for his part, couldn't stop talking about the party, especially since the teacher had taught the steps to the square dance, and he was eager to show what he had learned. "Dad, do you think Jessica will want to dance the square dance with me?" Michael asked, as Sarah helped him put on the denim overalls she had sewn herself. A pair with colourful patches, a red plaid shirt, and a straw hat adorned with ribbons. "Let's ask her, my son," Robert replied, feeling a tightness in his chest as he saw the excitement shining in the boy's green eyes. Jessica arrived at 7 o'clock, an hour later than planned, wearing a designer dress that cost over $2,000. A country version that looked more like it had come off a fashion runway than suitable for a community party. The silk fabric printed with small flowers, the impeccable cut, and the designer heels contrasted sharply with the casual atmosphere of the party. "Sorry for the delay, love. The traffic was impossible," she said, giving Robert a superficial kiss to avoid smudging her perfectly applied red lipstick. "Hi, Jessica! Look at my outfit!" Michael exclaimed, spinning around to show off his costume. "Very nice, me," she replied distractedly, already pulling out her phone to check messages. "Wow, it's so loud! Do they always have parties with such loud music?" Robert observed her reaction to the environment. Jessica looked around with a slight frown, as if she were being forced to attend a place below her social standard. She greeted the neighbors with polite but distant smiles, always with her phone in hand, ready to respond to messages she deemed more important than in-person interactions. "Jessica," Robert said, "do you remember that Michael learned the square dance at school? He's excited to dance." "Oh, how cute," she replied, but her tone showed no enthusiasm whatsoever. "You don't mind if... Should I post some stories first? I want to take advantage of the natural light that's still around." For the next 20 minutes, Jessica had a personal photo shoot, asking Robert to take pictures of her from various angles, always with studied poses and forced smiles. Michael waited patiently beside his father, watching the other adults dance and have fun. "Can I dance now?" Michael asked, when she finally put her phone away. "Me, let your aunt rest a bit first." "I'm thirsty," Jessica said, avoiding looking into the child's eyes. Sarah, who was observing everything from a nearby table where she was arranging the homemade dessert table she had prepared, felt her heart tighten at the disappointment on Michael's face. She had dressed simply, a floral sundress, a white cotton blouse, and a colourful scarf in her hair. But she radiated genuine joy that contrasted with Jessica's evident discomfort. "Michael," Sarah called, "how about teaching me those square dance steps? I'm curious to learn." The boy's face lit up. "Sure, Aunt Sarah. It's super easy." For 15 minutes, Michael patiently taught Sarah the steps, who was an eager and dedicated student. Robert watched the interaction with a genuine smile, noticing how Sarah managed to make his son momentarily forget Jessica's rejection. "En arrière, à l'avant, balancez!" shouted the party host, and Michael pulled Sarah by the hand, explaining each movement with the seriousness of a dance teacher. "Wow, how smart you are, Michael. I learned perfectly thanks to you," Sarah said, making the boy blush with pride. Then the most awkward moment of the night happened. The host announced that the next square dance would be special for parents and children, and Michael ran to where Jessica was sitting fiddling with Instagram. "Jessica, it's our turn. Do you want to be my partner in the special square dance?" Michael asked, extending his small dirt-covered hand from the yard where they had played. Jessica looked at the outstretched hand and then at her silk dress. "Oh, me, I'm sorry, but this dress cost a lot. If I dance, I might tear it or get it dirty, and look at your hands. They're all dirty." The boy looked at his own hands and then at her dress, trying to process the rejection. "I can wash my hands really quickly," he offered, his voice filled with hope. "No, me, better not to risk it. We can dance another day, okay?" Jessica said, turning her attention back to her phone. Robert felt something break inside him as he saw the expression on his son's face. Michael slowly lowered his hand, his small shoulders slumping in a defeated posture. That was painful to watch. "It's okay," Michael murmured, trying to hide the tear forming in the corner of his eye. At that moment, Sarah approached. "Michael, would you like to dance with me? I promise I won't step on your feet." "But you're not my mom," Michael said, and the innocence of the observation echoed through the hall like an accusation. "No, my love, but I'm someone who loves you very much and would be honored to dance with you," Sarah replied, kneeling to be at the boy's height. Michael looked one last time at Jessica, who remained absorbed in her phone, and then accepted Sarah's outstretched hand. The square dance that followed was both beautiful and painful to watch. Robert saw his son dancing happily with Sarah, who was trying hard to follow the steps, and laughed when she made mistakes, creating a moment of genuine joy for Michael. But he also saw Jessica in the corner of the hall, completely oblivious to what was happening, responding to work messages as if she were anywhere but at a family party with her boyfriend's family. When the music ended, Michael hugged Sarah tightly. "Thank you, Aunt Sarah. You're the best dance partner in the world." Robert approached and hugged both of them. "You danced beautifully." "It was fun, right, Michael?" Sarah said, adjusting the straw hat that had slipped during the dance. "It was. Jessica lost," Michael said, in a mix of pride and melancholy that broke Robert's heart. That night, on the way home, Michael fell asleep in the back seat of the car. Jessica, finally away from social obligations, relaxed and resumed speaking normally. "It was a cute little party," she commented. "A bit simple for my taste, but the neighbors are nice." "Jessica," Robert said, his hands gripping the steering wheel, "did you notice how sad Michael was when you refused to dance with him?" "Oh, Robert, don't exaggerate. He danced with Sarah and was super happy. And look at my dress, no damage at all," she said, smoothing the fabric as if she had done the world a great favor. Robert looked in the rearview mirror at Michael sleeping and made a decision. The plan needed to be accelerated. His son didn't deserve more nights like that. July arrived with its chilly mornings and the traditional winter school break. Robert had carefully planned this period, knowing it would be a golden opportunity to further test Jessica's character. The penthouse, usually full of life with Michael's energy, felt strangely silent as he sipped coffee alone on a cold Tuesday morning. "Good morning, Mr. Robert," Sarah greeted, bringing warm bread she had bought from the bakery on the ground floor of the building. "Michael is still sleeping. He stayed up late last night putting together that new puzzle." "Let him rest. Vacations are for that," Robert replied, pretending to read the newspaper while mentally organizing the conversation he would have with Jessica shortly. At 10 in the morning, Jessica arrived with a proposal that Robert pretended to consider a surprise, but which he had orchestrated through strategic comments in the previous weeks. "Robert, love, I was thinking," she said, sitting on the beige leather sofa and crossing her long legs over the coffee table. "How about Michael spending these 2 weeks of vacation with his uncles in the countryside? It would be good for him to connect with nature, and we could have... It's just our time." Robert pretended to consider the suggestion, when in fact it was he who had planted the idea in her head by mentioning how Michael loved visiting his paternal uncles in Asheville. "Do you really think it would be good for him?" Robert asked, testing her justification. "Of course. Kids need to run, play outside. And honestly," she lowered her voice, "I think he shouldn't witness all these conversations about financial problems. It must be stressful for a child." The feigned concern in Jessica's voice would be convincing to anyone who didn't know her well, but Robert was beginning to decipher every nuance of her manipulative personality. "That makes sense," Robert agreed. "I'll call my brother." When Michael woke up and learned about the trip, he was genuinely excited. His uncles had a small farm with horses, and he loved helping to feed the animals. But at the farewell, the boy looked for Jessica. "Jessica, are you going to miss me?" Michael asked, with that childlike hope that still made him seek her approval. "Of course, I will," Jessica lied, already mentally planning the parties and events she could attend without having to worry about child schedules. Sarah, who was helping Michael pack, watched the interaction with a heavy heart. The housekeeper knew well the tone people used. When lying to children, it was different, higher-pitched, exaggerated. And Michael, despite being only 7 years old, also seemed to sense the falseness. "Sarah, are you going to miss me too?" Michael asked, turning to the housekeeper. "I will miss you so much, my love. So much that I will count the days until you come back," Sarah replied with absolute sincerity, hugging the boy. The difference between the two responses was striking, and Robert did not fail to notice. With Michael at his uncle's farm, the penthouse took on a completely different dynamic. Jessica practically moved in, arriving on Thursday morning with 2 large suitcases full of clothes and beauty products. "This is better, right, love? Just you and me," she said, hugging Robert from behind while he worked on his laptop at the dining table. During the first few days, Jessica was attentive and affectionate, but Robert noticed that it was a calculated attention, almost performative. She cooked elaborate dishes, always photographing them for Instagram before serving, organized romantic dinners, and was available for conversations about work. It was in the second week that Robert decided to dramatically intensify his plan. "Jessica, I need to tell you something very serious," he said one Saturday morning while they had coffee on the balcony overlooking the ocean. "Yesterday I spoke with Mark about the real situation of the company." "What happened?" she asked, and Robert noticed how her posture changed instantly. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowed slightly, all signs that her attention was fully focused. "The situation is worse than we imagined. Much worse," Robert lied, watching every micro-expression on her face. "It seems we will have to sell some personal properties to cover the company's debts." "Personal properties? Which properties?" The question came out too quickly. revealing a concern that had very little to do with Robert's emotional well-being. Maybe the beach apartment in Myrtle Beach, and possibly this penthouse, Robert said, letting the information hang in the air. The silence that followed was revealing. Jessica remained still for almost a minute, processing the information. Robert could see the gears turning in her mind. "Robert, do you really think there's no other alternative? Some way to get loans or investors?" she finally asked. "I'm exploring all possibilities, but the truth is, we might have to return to a simpler lifestyle. At least, until we can rebuild the company," Robert said, pretending to feel a vulnerability he didn't feel. "Simpler like what?" The question came out almost as a whisper. "Maybe a smaller apartment in a less affluent neighborhood, cutting some unnecessary expenses, going back to basics until things improve." Jessica abruptly got up from the table. I'm going to the bathroom," she murmured, and Robert noticed that her hands were trembling slightly. When she returned, 15 minutes later, her eyes were red as if she had been crying. But Robert suspected that the tears were not out of compassion for his situation, but out of desperation for her own. "Robert," she said, sitting down again, "do you think maybe I should go back to my apartment for now? I don't want to be an additional burden during this difficult time." The suggestion to distance herself when he needed support the most felt like a confession. Robert felt a mix of relief at having his suspicion confirmed and sadness at discovering that he had been completely wrong about the character of the woman he intended to share his life with. "If you think it's best," Robert said, pretending to reluctantly accept the suggestion. "It's just temporary, love, until you can resolve this situation. Then we'll go back to normal," Jessica said, but her tone couldn't disguise the relief. That night, alone in the penthouse, Sarah had taken the day off to visit a friend in Miami. Robert reflected on the past few months. Jessica had revealed exactly who she was, a selfish woman, incapable of truly loving a child, and who fled at the first sign of difficulty. Michael would be back in 3 days, and Robert would have to make a definitive decision, but he already knew what that decision would be. The plan had worked perfectly, perhaps too well. The second week of August brought a twist that Robert had not anticipated in his most detailed plans. It was a rainy Thursday when his phone rang at 10 in the morning, displaying the name of Maria Johnson, an old college friend who now worked in public relations in Myrtle Beach. "Robert? Hi, dear. How are you?" Maria said, her voice carrying that cautious tone people use when they have bad news to deliver. "Hi, Marie. What a surprise. Everything is great, and you?" Robert replied, unaware that this call would completely change the course of his investigation into Jessica. "Robert, look, I don't quite know how to say this, but last night I was having dinner at the Lobster Shack, that new restaurant in downtown Myrtle Beach, and I saw Jessica there." Robert felt his stomach tighten. "Oh, she must be working. There are always those business dinners for Instagram partnerships." "Robert," Maria's voice became even more hesitant. "She wasn't alone. She was with a man, and from what I could tell, it didn't seem like a work dinner." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for long seconds. Robert felt his heart race, but a part of him wasn't completely surprised. It was as if a piece of a puzzle finally clicked into place. "Are you sure it was her?" Robert asked, his voice strangely calm. "I am. I even thought about greeting her, but the intimacy between them made me back off. Robert, they were holding hands, and she was wearing that emerald ring you gave her for her birthday." Robert closed his eyes. The ring had cost $15,000, a unique piece he had specially ordered for her. "Maria, could you do me a favor? If you see her again in similar situations, can you let me know?" "Of course, Robert, and I'm sorry to have to tell you this." After hanging up the phone, Robert stood still in the penthouse. staring at the sea without really seeing the waves crashing on the beach. A part of him felt relieved. Now he had a concrete reason to end the relationship beyond the tests he had orchestrated. But another part felt deeply betrayed, and worse still, worried about what else he might discover. He decided he needed more concrete evidence before confronting Jessica. He picked up the phone and called Mark. "Mark, I need you to help me with something delicate. Do you have any contacts for a private investigator?" "Robert, what the hell is going on? First the fake documents, now a PI. It's about Jessica. I just received some disturbing information, and I need to know the whole truth before making any decisions." 3 hours later, Robert was sitting in the office of Andrew Caldwell, a private investigator recommended by Mark. The man in his 50s, with grey hair and a serious expression, listened attentively as Robert recounted his suspicions. "Mr. Miller, what exactly would you like me to investigate? I want to know if my girlfriend is having other relationships. And if possible, find out how long this has been going on," Robert said, feeling strange verbalizing his suspicions. "Understood. I need some basic information. Her routine, places she frequents, phone numbers." Robert provided all the information he had, feeling increasingly uncomfortable, but knowing he needed the truth. 2 weeks later, Andrew called with the results. "Mr. Miller, can we meet? I have some important information." They met in the same office. Andrew placed a folder on the table with photos, documents, and detailed notes. "Mr. Miller, your suspicion was correct. Jessica Smith is maintaining relationships with at least 2 other people besides you," Andrew said, opening the folder. Robert felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. 2 people? Yes, a businessman in the cosmetics industry named Frank Anderson, 52 years old, divorced, owner of a distributor in Charleston, and a plastic surgeon named Dr. Robert Smith, 38 years old, who practices in Miami. Andrew showed the photos. Jessica at romantic dinners, entering hotels, always with the same affectionate gestures that Robert thought were exclusively his. "How long?" Robert asked, his voice barely audible. "From what I could gather, the relationship with Frank started about 8 months ago. The one with Dr. Robert, 5 months. Both believe they are her only serious relationship." Robert examined the photos in silence. In one of them, Jessica was wearing the pearl necklace he had given her on Valentine's Day. In another, she was beaming at Frank in the same restaurant where they used to dine. "There's more," Andrew continued. "She uses your name to get discounts and privileges at various commercial establishments. I found at least 5 luxury clothing stores where she claims to be engaged to Robert Miller of Miller Developments." The revelation hit him like a punch to the gut. Robert realized he knew absolutely nothing about the woman he had planned to share his life with and introduce as a stepmother to Michael. "Andrew, do you think she knows about my real financial situation? That she discovered the problems are fake?" "I don't think so. From what I've observed, she genuinely believes you are struggling. In fact, I heard her mention to a friend that she was waiting for the storm to pass to decide what to do about the relationship." Robert paid Andrew's fees and drove home in shock. During the drive, his phone rang. It was Jessica. "Hi, love. How are you?" "I'm fine. And you?" Robert replied, trying to keep his voice normal. "Oh, I'm super busy today. I have a photo shoot in the morning, and then I need to take care of some personal things. How about we have dinner tomorrow? I miss you." Robert hung up the phone, knowing that the personal things likely involved Frank or Dr. Robert. Arriving home, he found Sarah preparing lunch. The housekeeper greeted him with her usual smile, but immediately noticed something was wrong. "Mr. Miller, did something happen? You look—" Robert looked at the woman who took care of his home and his son with such care and dedication. Sarah deserved to know the truth, or at least part of it. "Sarah, I discovered some things about Jessica, things that make me question everything I thought I knew about her." Do you want to talk about it? Robert nodded. For the first time in months, he felt he needed to share the weight he carried with someone he completely trusted. And Sarah was the most reliable person he knew. Michael returned from his vacation in the countryside on a sunny Sunday morning, bringing with him the renewed energy of 2 weeks running on a farm, the longing etched on his face. Robert was waiting for him at the airport in Miami along with Sarah, who had insisted on accompanying them despite it being her day off. "Dad! Grandma Sarah!" shouted Michael, running into the arms of both as soon as he appeared at the arrivals. "I missed you so much. Uncle George taught me how to ride a horse, and Aunt Fiona let me help make bread." Robert hugged his son tightly, feeling a mix of joy at his return and anxiety about what was about to happen. He had made the decision to break up with Jessica, but he wanted it to be as least traumatic as possible for Michael. "And Jessica, didn't she come to pick you up?" asked Michael, looking around the airport. "She's working today, my son, but she's excited to see you," Robert lied, knowing that Jessica didn't even know Michael was coming back that day. During the ride home, Michael excitedly talked about the adventures in the countryside, but Robert noticed he mentioned Jessica several times, asking if she missed him and if she was curious to hear his stories. Upon arriving at the penthouse, Robert decided it was time to be honest with his son, within the appropriate limits for a 7-year-old. "Michael," Robert said after they settled in the living room, "Dad needs to talk to you about something important." The boy immediately stopped playing with the gifts he had brought from the farm. "Is everything okay, Dad? Is it about work?" "No, son, it's about Jessica. Dad found out that maybe she isn't the right person to be part of our family." Michael was silent for a few seconds, processing the information. "Does that mean you guys are going to break up?" "Probably yes, my love. And I wanted to explain that it has nothing to do with you. You are perfect just the way you are." "I know, Dad," said Michael, with a maturity that surprised Robert. "She never really liked me anyway. Grandma Sarah explained to me that sometimes adults are a bit complicated." Robert looked at Sarah, who was in the kitchen pretending not to listen, but clearly attentive to the conversation. "What did Grandma Sarah tell you? That some people really like kids and others just pretend to like them, and that I will always know the difference because our heart tells us," Michael replied simply. At that moment, Robert understood that he had underestimated his son's emotional intelligence. Michael had always known that Jessica didn't feel genuine affection for him. It was then that the doorbell rang. Robert looked through the intercom and saw Jessica in the entrance hall, clearly irritated. "Robert, open up. I need to talk to you urgently," she said through the intercom, her shrill voice coming through the small speaker. Robert opened the door, and Jessica stormed in. She was wearing a tight red dress, high heels, and an expression of fury that Robert had never seen before. "Can you explain to me what this story is about, you making up lies about our company?" She exploded before even greeting Michael. Robert felt his blood run cold. "What are you talking about, Jessica? Yesterday I was with Fiona at the mall, and we ran into George, that architect who works with you. He mentioned the new project for the company in Ocean View, and asked if I had seen the plans," Jessica said, each word laced with venom. "What project, Robert? Weren't you supposed to be broke?" Michael shrank back on the sofa, clearly scared by her aggressive tone. Sarah immediately moved closer to the boy, placing a protective hand on his shoulder. Robert realized he had been found out, and strangely felt a sense of relief. He wouldn't have to pretend anymore. "Jessica, let's talk calmly," Robert said, trying to lower the tone of the discussion because of Michael. "Calm? Robert, you deceived me. You pretended to have financial problems and made me look like a fool," she shouted, pointing her finger at him accusingly. "Jessica, please lower your voice. Michael is here," Robert pleaded. "Michael, Michael, always Michael," she exploded, turning to the child with a look of pure disdain. "Do you know your dad is a liar? That he made up a bunch of lies to test me?" Michael started to cry silently, not fully understanding what was happening, but realizing he was being attacked. "Jessica!" Robert shouted, finally losing his patience. "Leave my son out of this. Your son needs to know what kind of father he has. A man who lies, who deceives, who pretends to be poor to test his girlfriend," Jessica yelled, completely out of control. It was then that Sarah stood up. The housekeeper, who had always maintained a discreet and respectful demeanor, walked slowly towards Jessica with an expression Robert had never seen. "Enough," Sarah said, her voice low but filled with authority. "You will stop yelling at this child right now." "And you, who do you think you are to give me orders?" "You're just a housekeeper," Jessica retorted, turning her fury towards Sarah. "I am a housekeeper who loves this family, and I will not allow you to continue traumatizing this child," Sarah said, physically placing herself between Jessica and Michael. "Robert," Jessica said, ignoring Sarah and turning back to him, "you will have to choose. Either you fire this woman and admit that you owe me an apology, or we end this now." Robert looked at Michael crying on the sofa, at Sarah protecting his son like a lioness protects her cub, and at Jessica with her childish and cruel ultimatum. "You are right, Jessica, we are done now," Robert said, his voice firm and definitive. "What?" she asked, clearly not expecting that response. "You heard me right. We're done, and I want you to leave my house right now," Robert said, pointing to the door. "Robert, you can't be serious. You're dismissing me because of a housekeeper and a spoiled child." The way she referred to Michael was the last straw. Robert walked to the door. He opened the door. "Get out, now. You're going to regret this, Robert. I'm going to tell everyone what kind of man you are," Jessica threatened, pulling her bag. "Feel free," Robert replied calmly. Jessica stormed out, slamming the door and leaving a heavy silence in the apartment. Michael was still quietly crying on the sofa, and Sarah remained by his side, stroking his hair. Robert approached and hugged them both. "It's over," he said. "For good." At that moment, the three of them could finally breathe a sigh of relief. The storm had passed, and they had survived together. The days that followed the confrontation with Jessica were filled with a tranquility that Robert had forgotten existed. It was as if a dark cloud had been lifted from the apartment, allowing natural light to illuminate every corner of the house once again. Michael, after a few days of introspection, returned to his usual cheerful behavior, and Robert noticed that his son was genuinely relieved by the end of the relationship. "Dad," Michael said one Thursday morning while they had breakfast prepared by Sarah, "aren't you sad about Jessica?" Robert paused with the cup halfway to his lips. "Why do you ask that, my son?" "Because when Mom died, you were very sad for a long time. I thought you would be sad again," Michael replied, nibbling on a piece of sugar bread that Sarah had made especially for him. "No, Michael, I'm not sad. I'm relieved," Robert said honestly. "Sometimes we find out that some people weren't as special as we thought." Sarah, who was organizing the kitchen, smiled discreetly upon hearing the conversation. In recent days, she had noticed a profound change in Robert. He seemed lighter, more present, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from his shoulders. It was on that Friday that Robert made a decision he had been contemplating for days. "Sarah," he said when he returned from work, "can we talk? I have a proposal for you." "Of course, Mr. Robert. Did something happen?" "I want to offer you a new position," Robert said, sitting at the kitchen table where Sarah was helping Michael with his homework. "I want you to be officially the family care coordinator and educational tutor for Michael." Sarah stopped correcting the math notebook and looked at Robert in surprise. "What do you mean, Mr. Robert?" "Sarah, you have a background in psychology. You know Michael better than anyone. You take care of this house and this family as if they were your own. I want to formalize this and give you the recognition and compensation you deserve," Robert explained. But Mr. Robert, I like what I do. It doesn't need to change. Sarah, you saved my son. Not just today, but every day since you started working here. And I want you to know how much I value that, Robert said, moved. Michael looked from Grandma Sarah to his dad. Does this mean Grandma Sarah will stay with us forever? If she wants to, yes, Robert replied. I want to. I want to so much, Michael exclaimed, hugging Sarah around the waist. The housekeeper felt her eyes welling up. I accept the proposal, Mr. Robert, but with one condition. What is it? That I continue doing the cleaning as well. I don't want to lose my autonomy. I want to keep taking care of this house completely, Sarah said with dignity. Done, Robert agreed, extending his hand to seal the deal. It was the following Monday that Andrew, the private investigator, called with information Robert did not expect. Mr. Miller, I discovered something you need to know about Jessica Smith, Andrew said over the phone. What is it now? Robert asked, fearing more unpleasant revelations. She tried to sell information about your company to Almeida and Sons Construction. I intercepted a phone call where she was offering project plans and financial data in exchange for $50,000. Robert felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. Are you sure about this? Absolutely, I have recordings. Apparently she photographed documents that were in your house during the months you were dating. What kind of documents? Plans for future developments, client lists, financial spreadsheets. Information that could cause serious damage to your company if it reached competitors. Robert closed his eyes, realizing the extent of the betrayal. If it weren't for the plan he had devised, if he hadn't discovered Jessica's true character, she could have caused millions in losses for his company. Andrew, can you send me all the evidence? I'm going to need it. I'm already preparing everything, and Mr. Miller, you were lucky to find out in time. That night, Robert talked to Mark about the discoveries. Robert, you need to sue that woman. This is industrial espionage, Mark said, reviewing the documents Andrew had provided. I'm going to do that, but first, I want to make sure she hasn't leaked any truly critical information. During the subsequent security audit, they discovered that Jessica had indeed photographed several important documents, but most of the information had not yet been passed on to competitors due to the sudden end of the relationship. She was waiting for the right moment, Andrew explained. She probably wanted to make sure you two had really broken up before burning all the bridges. Robert realized that, ironically, his plan to pretend to have financial problems had saved his company from a devastating blow. If Jessica thought he still had money, she would have likely sold the information long before. On that Thursday, Robert was at the office when he received an unexpected call. Robert? It's Jessica. Can we talk? We have nothing to talk about, Jessica. Robert, please. I made some mistakes. But we can resolve this like civilized people, she said, her voice taking on a conciliatory tone that he knew all too well. Jessica, I know about the attempt to sell information from my company. The silence on the other end of the line lasted almost a minute. Robert, I can explain. You don't need to. My lawyers will be in touch with you soon. Robert, please, it doesn't have to come to that. We can... Robert hung up the phone. That night there was nothing more to discuss. When he arrived home, he found Michael and Sarah in the kitchen making chocolate chip cookies. The sweet aroma filled the house, and the sound of their laughter echoed through the halls. Dad, look, Grandma Sarah is teaching me how to make cookies, Michael exclaimed, his hands covered in dough and a smile that Robert hadn't seen in months. Robert looked at the scene, his happy son, Sarah genuinely smiling, the house filled with warmth, and realized he had found something far more valuable than a romantic relationship. He had found a true family. December arrived in Miami, with the characteristic humid heat of summer and the scent of blooming flowers throughout the city. Robert's apartment had completely transformed over the past few months, not just in decoration, which now included Michael's drawings adorning the walls and plants that Sarah lovingly tended to on the balcony, but mainly in the emotional atmosphere that filled the space. It was Christmas Eve when Robert decided to reflect on the year that had changed their lives so profoundly, sitting on the back porch, watching the Christmas lights twinkling on the neighboring buildings and listening to the distant sound of cicadas announcing summer. He pondered every decision that had brought him to that moment. "Dad, what are you thinking about?" Michael asked, appearing on the porch with a glass of mango juice prepared by Sarah. "I'm thinking about the past year, son, about how we've changed, how we've grown," Robert replied, making space on the wooden bench for Michael to sit beside him. "It was a good year, right?" Michael said, swinging his legs in the air. "Even with all that confusion with Jessica." Robert smiled as he noticed how his son referred to that period as the confusion with Jessica, a childlike yet accurate way to summarize the chaos she had brought into their lives. "It was a year of learning, Michael. We learned about people, about trust, about what really matters. And we learned that Grandma Sarah is the best person in the world," Michael said enthusiastically. Robert laughed, completely agreeing. In recent months, Sarah had become much more than a housekeeper, or even a maternal figure to Michael. She was the heart of the home, the person who transformed a simple luxury apartment into a true home. "Michael," Robert said, "do you remember that drawing you made at school where you drew our family?" "I remember. It was me, you, and Grandma Sarah," Michael replied. "Back then, I thought it was interesting that you didn't include Jessica. Now I understand that you always knew who really belonged to our family." Michael paused for a few seconds. "Dad, kids know these things, you know. We can feel when someone truly cares about us and when they're just pretending." The simple wisdom of his 7-year-old son impressed Robert once again. Throughout the test period with Jessica, Michael had shown an emotional intuition that adults often lost. Sarah appeared on the porch carrying a tray with freshly brewed coffee and the cornbread that had become a tradition in their home. "Sorry to interrupt the men's conversation," she said with a smile, "but I thought you might like some coffee." "Grandma Sarah, Dad was talking about family," Michael said, "about how you've always been part of our family, even before it was official." Sarah sat in the wicker chair next to them, her brown eyes shining with contained emotion. At 47 years old, she had celebrated her birthday in November with a simple but heartfelt party that Robert and Michael organized for her. Sarah radiated a serenity and wisdom that came not only from her academic background, but from a life lived with purpose and love. "Michael," Sarah said, "you know that taking care of you has never been work for me, right? It has always been love." "I know, and we love you too," Michael replied, getting up to hug the housekeeper who had become his heart's grandmother. Robert watched that interaction with a deep gratitude that sometimes surprised him. Sarah had come into their lives at a time of need when he needed someone to help with Michael after the death of his wife. But she had offered much more than practical care. She had provided unconditional love, maternal wisdom, and an emotional stability that Robert hadn't realized he needed. "Sarah," Robert said, "can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, Mr. Robert." "Have you ever thought about getting married again? Having your own family?" Sarah smiled, stroking Michael's hair as he nestled beside her. "Mr. Robert, I have a family. You all are my family. And as for marriage, well, after losing my husband, I learned that true love isn't found only in marriage. It's found in caring for those in need, being present in important moments, and building something good together." Sarah's words resonated deeply with Robert. Throughout the year, he had been obsessed with finding a new mother for Michael, a new wife for himself. But he had lost sight of something fundamental. They were already a complete family. Different, non-traditional, but complete and functional. "Dad," Michael suddenly said, "next year I'm going to turn 8. "You sure are, champ, and we're going to throw a beautiful party for you. Can I have a party here at home, with Grandma Sarah helping to organize?" "Of course you can," Robert replied, looking at Sarah, who nodded with emotion. In that moment, Robert realized something fundamental. Michael had never asked to have a party at home when Jessica was in their lives. Unconsciously, the boy didn't feel completely comfortable in his own home when she was present. Now, with Sarah as the central figure of the house, Michael finally felt safe to express his innermost desires. When the sun had completely set, and the lights of the city began to shine more brightly, and the three of them were still on the porch discussing plans for the following year, about the vacations they would take together, and how they would continue building their non-traditional but deeply loving family. "Mr. Robert," Sarah said when Michael fell asleep nestled between them, "can I say something?" "Always." "What you did this year, testing Jessica, was brave. Many parents would put their own desire for companionship above their children's well-being. Sarah, if I hadn't done that, if I hadn't discovered who she really was, Michael would have suffered much more, and so would you." Robert nodded, knowing she was right. The plan had been risky, elaborate, even a bit cruel. But it had saved his son from years of subtle rejection and himself from a disastrous marriage. "You know what else?" Sarah continued. "I always knew something was wrong with her, but it wasn't my place to say." "How did you know?" "The way she looked at Michael, or rather how she avoided looking at him. A woman who truly loves a man learns to love his children too. It's natural, automatic. She never even tried." Robert carried the sleeping Michael to the bedroom, tucking him into bed with the usual care. When he returned to the porch, he found Sarah gathering the empty cups. "Sarah, thank you," he said. "For what, Mr. Robert?" "For everything. For being you. For loving my son. For making our house a true home." Sarah stopped what she was doing and looked at Robert with that maternal smile that had become so familiar and necessary. "Mr. Robert, thank you for letting me be part of this family. You gave me more than a job. You gave me purpose, love, and the chance to see a child grow up happy and secure." That night, before sleeping, Robert looked out the bedroom window at the stars shining over Miami. The year had started with him desperately trying to create a traditional family for Michael. It ended with the understanding that the perfect family for them followed no manual or social expectation. It was made up of a widowed father who had learned to value what truly mattered, a resilient child who knew how to recognize true love, and an extraordinary woman who had made caring for others her life's mission. There were no blood ties between Sarah and them. There were no official ceremonies or legal documents formalizing that family, but there was something much more powerful. Genuine love, mutual respect, unconditional care, and the conscious decision, renewed every day, to be together. Robert fell asleep that Christmas Eve with the certainty that he had found what he had been searching for all along. True love was not that of romantic movies or fairy tales. It was the love that manifested in daily life, in small gestures, in constant care, in genuine presence during difficult moments. True love was Sarah getting up early to care for Michael when he had nightmares. It was Michael drawing the family without hesitation in including those who truly mattered. It was the daily decision of three people to choose each other, to care for one another, and to build together something greater than the sum of their parts. When Christmas dawned, bringing a golden sun streaming through the living room window, Robert woke up to the sound of laughter from Michael and Sarah, preparing the special Christmas morning coffee. The smell of French toast and freshly brewed coffee filled the apartment, mingling with the scent of the flowers that Sarah cultivated and the sound of the ocean eternally crashing on South Beach. Three destinies that life had improbably intertwined had found in one another exactly what they needed. True love had rewritten their stories, proving that the best families are not necessarily those we are born into, but those we choose to build with courage, honesty, and dedication. And Robert knew with absolute certainty that this was just the first page of a new story they would write together. A story of true love that transcended conventions and was based on what truly mattered: being present, genuinely caring, and choosing every day to be family. Please like, subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and if you watched until here, comment, "I watched until here," and leave your opinion about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the final screen. It's very exciting.